Special Agent Belle Monroe, Deputy Director of the FBI, had endured countless long nights, but none quite like this. It was just past 11:30 p.m. when she left the secure parking lot near Quantico, her mind still tangled in classified case files and national security threats. Driving her black Lexus along the quiet stretch of Route 234, Belle was deep in thought when flashing red and blue lights lit up behind her. At first, she assumed it was a routine patrol, but when the cruiser didn't pass, her instincts sharpened. She hadn't broken any laws, no speeding, no broken lights. Yet she eased onto the shoulder, drawing from years of law enforcement training. Don't panic, stay visible, follow protocol. The officer approached slowly, almost theatrically. His nameplate read, Riker. White male, mid-30s, big build. Sunglasses on his head despite the night. He didn't greet her, just shined a flashlight in her window and demanded her license and registration. Belle calmly provided both, including her FBI badge, but the badge didn't earn her the respect it should have. Instead, it seemed to provoke him. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "On what grounds?" she asked, her voice steady. "Suspicious behavior," he replied coldly. When she reminded him he was violating federal protocol, his hand inched toward his weapon. The tension snapped when he slammed his hands on her roof and shouted. Belle knew then. This wasn't about the law, it was about control. Just as she cracked the door to comply, a voice cut through the night. "I'm recording this." "Don't touch her." A young man stood on the shoulder, phone raised. Riker turned, gun still drawn, suddenly unsure, and in that frozen moment, Belle stepped out, eyes locked on the man who had just made the worst mistake of his career. "Put your weapon down, now," she commanded, and everything changed. The morning after the incident, Belle Monroe walked into FBI headquarters with a fire burning beneath her calm exterior. The night's events had rattled her, but more than that, they had revealed something deeply wrong. Something bigger than one rogue officer. As deputy director, she had the authority and the access, and she was going to use both. She immediately ordered a full internal inquiry into Officer Riker and anyone connected to him. Her team pulled his personnel file, and what they found was worse than expected. 4 prior complaints for excessive force, 3 for misconduct, all quietly dismissed, without disciplinary action. The name that appeared in the paperwork most frequently was Captain Alan Briggs, Riker's commanding officer and longtime ally. Briggs had fast-tracked Riker's promotions, shielded him during investigations, and helped bury an incident where Riker allegedly assaulted a Latino teenager during a traffic stop. There had been no footage, no witnesses, just silence. That silence, Belle realized, was the real danger. It was the silence of a system designed not to hold its own accountable. As Belle pored over files and surveillance footage, her instincts told her this wasn't an isolated case. She could feel the resistance already building, whispers in the hallway, requests for her to de-escalate and let the department handle it quietly. But she wasn't interested in quiet. This was personal now, not just for her, but for every black and brown citizen who had ever been stopped, questioned, threatened, and silenced. The badge hadn't protected her last night. If anything, it had made her more of a target. That truth pushed her forward. She demanded access to all dashcam and body cam footage from the night of the stop. What she got back was telling. Officer Riker's body cam hadn't been active. "Convenient," she muttered. The cover-up had already begun. But Belle wasn't alone. Marquez Thompson, the young man who had filmed the stop, had the video, and it was clear, damning, and already in her hands. With it, she had more than a defense. She had evidence, and she wasn't going to let them bury it. As far as Belle Monroe was concerned, this wasn't just an investigation anymore. This was the beginning of a reckoning. As Belle Monroe dug deeper into the case, the details became more disturbing than she could have imagined. This wasn't just about one traffic stop gone wrong, it was the tip of something far more sinister. One morning, a manila envelope appeared on her desk without a sender or note, only a red stamp that read "Confidential." Inside were internal complaint reports, signed statements, and, most hauntingly, photographs. One photo showed Officer Riker and Captain Briggs sitting at a bar with a third man Belle didn't recognize. But another image sent a chill through her. It showed a teenage boy, bruised and handcuffed, being shoved into a patrol car. No booking record, no case file, no name. That boy had simply vanished. Scrawled faintly on the back of the photo was a name, Derek Sims. Belle's pulse quickened. Cross-checking department logs, she found that on the night Derek was taken, Riker's squad logged a vague, routine traffic stop with no follow-up documentation. Body cam footage was missing, dash cam data had been erased. It was clear this wasn't negligence, it was intentional. When Belle and her team pulled juvenile detention records, what they discovered confirmed her worst fears. Derek Sims had been processed into a facility 2 weeks after the night in question, but there was no release date. In fact, dozens of minors, mostly Black and Latino, had intake forms without matching exit records. They weren't just disappearing from the streets. They were being quietly absorbed into a system designed to erase them. Someone was orchestrating this, someone with power, someone who knew how to manipulate protocol, silence complaints, and vanish evidence. Belle realized that if Derek hadn't made it out, his story might never have come to light. But someone had made sure his photo landed on her desk. Someone wanted the truth exposed, but feared going through official channels. That meant this went even higher than she'd thought. Belle's determination solidified. This wasn't about departmental misconduct anymore. It was about systemic abuse, and she had just uncovered the first breadcrumb of something far darker. And she wasn't about to stop now. The deeper Belle Monroe pushed into the investigation, the clearer it became. This was no longer a matter of departmental misconduct. Someone was actively working to sabotage her efforts. Late one night, her cyber division flagged an unauthorized attempt to access and alter her FBI personnel file. The hacker had tried to lower her clearance level, erase her title, and make her credentials appear fake. If successful, it would have confirmed Riker's suspicion during the stop and possibly justified his actions. That wasn't just coincidence. It was calculated. Someone had wanted that encounter to escalate, and someone high up had the resources to try and digitally erase a deputy director from the system. Then came another anonymous lead, this time in the form of security footage from a gas station near where the traffic stop occurred. The footage showed Riker meeting a third man, the same one seen in the photographs with him and Captain Briggs. Riker accepted something from him. Small, dark, possibly a signal jammer. It explained why Belle's vehicle's internal recording system failed that night. This wasn't an impulsive act by a reckless cop. It was premeditated. Someone had orchestrated every piece of that encounter. That same day, Belle learned from Agent Santiago that the anonymous tampering originated from inside the Internal Affairs Division itself. The pieces were falling into place, and they pointed to Wendell Price, the very man leading the supposed internal investigation. Price had been sitting across from Belle in meetings, pretending to support her pursuit of justice while working behind the scenes to bury it. The corruption didn't just live within the force. It sat in the very branch meant to hold that force accountable. Belle knew now that she was not just chasing misconduct. She was dismantling a network, and every move she made from this point forward would be met with resistance. But she didn't flinch. Whoever had tried to erase her underestimated the one thing that kept her going: truth backed by relentless pursuit. They were playing a dangerous game, and Belle Monroe had just flipped the board. With the web of corruption widening, Belle Monroe made a decision that would change everything. She went public. Standing before a sea of cameras at the Department of Justice, she delivered a calm but unflinching statement. She had been held at gunpoint during a traffic stop not because she broke any law, but because the system had been conditioned to see her, a black woman in authority, as a threat. She didn't name just Officer Riker, she named the system, the silence, the decades of misconduct buried by protocol and protected by insiders. And now, she announced, the silence was over. The Justice Department would be launching a federal investigation into organized corruption within law enforcement, specifically targeting misconduct and exploitation within the juvenile detention system. Her words rippled across the country. Headlines exploded. Departments scrambled. And behind the scenes, the dominoes began to fall. Riker, now fully in custody, tried to make a deal. He would talk in exchange for protection. His statements confirmed much of what Belle had already suspected. The traffic stop wasn't random, it was part of a pattern. Captain Briggs, Wendell Price, and others had been using their authority to funnel vulnerable teens, mostly Black and Latino, into facilities where they would vanish without accountability. As Belle's team compiled evidence, other departments began their own internal reviews, and congressional hearings were scheduled. For the first time in years, the juvenile system, often overlooked and underfunded, was being thrust into the national spotlight. Amidst the chaos, Belle remained steady. She wasn't here to clean up a PR disaster, she was here to dismantle the machine. And she wasn't alone. Marquise Thompson, the young man who filmed the stop, was now under federal protection and standing beside her, no longer a bystander but a voice for the unheard. As Belle reviewed press briefings and legal files, she knew this was just the beginning. The real storm hadn't even started. But the wall of silence was cracking, and she intended to break it wide open. The breakthrough came quietly but hit like a thunderclap. Derek Sims was alive. After Belle Monroe's press conference went viral, a shelter in Delaware reported that a young man, using a false name, had come forward claiming he had once been disappeared by police. Belle personally traveled to meet him. In a small, quiet room at the shelter, she sat across from a boy who looked far older than his 17 years. Derek's eyes were wary, his fingers twitching nervously as he slid a battered journal across the table. Inside were names, dates, descriptions, meticulously recorded accounts of kids who had vanished just like he had. Guards, transport vans, secret routes. Derek had written it all down, never truly believing it would matter, until now. He told Belle how, after being picked up by Riker, he was taken not to a precinct but to a juvenile facility under a false charge. From there he was shuffled between locations, sometimes with no food, no lawyer, no contact with the outside world. He only escaped when one driver, someone who had grown up in his old neighborhood, quietly let him go and warned him to stay silent. Derek had stayed hidden for years, afraid they'd find him again. But now, with Belle's investigation breaking into the public eye, he knew it was time to speak. His testimony, combined with his journal, was the key to everything. The intake forms with no release dates, the guards who'd lost track of minors, the transportation logs tied to Riker and Briggs. Derek connected the dots and gave Belle and the Justice Department a roadmap to an organized system of abuse and exploitation. For the first time, they had a living witness, a survivor. Belle promised him protection, and more importantly, justice. As he sat across from her, voice shaking but steady, she realized something vital. Derek wasn't just a victim. He was a whistleblower, and with his story, the system that had thrived in silence for years would finally be forced to answer. The storm that Belle Monroe had unleashed was no longer confined to her department. It had gone national. With Derek Sims' testimony, Marquise Thompson's footage, and a mountain of supporting evidence, the Justice Department issued a series of federal indictments. Officers, wardens, and administrators were arrested. Wendell Price, once the untouchable head of internal affairs, was now behind bars, and his cooperation was unraveling the entire network. Captain Briggs lawyered up, but couldn't outrun the charges. As the truth emerged, so did the horrifying scale of the abuse. Dozens of minors funneled through a shadow system, their identities erased, their voices silenced, until now. Congress launched oversight hearings. State and local governments initiated independent reviews of their juvenile justice systems. Headlines ran daily updates, and Belle Monroe became a reluctant national figure, a symbol of fearless accountability. Yet she refused to frame this as a personal victory. Standing before the Senate Oversight Committee, she made it clear, "This is not about me. It's about every voice we didn't hear, every report that never reached your desk, every child who was taught that silence is the price of survival." Her words struck a nerve. This time, the country was listening. But Belle knew the cost of exposure. Threats increased. Her team worked around the clock under heightened security. Marquise, now wearing a suit instead of a hoodie, had been invited to speak at a youth reform panel. Derek, protected and healing, would join him. For Belle, these moments, small, human, powerful, were what made the battle worth it. Even with arrests and investigations underway, Belle wasn't finished. She called for deeper reform, transparency in juvenile detention, federal oversight of local law enforcement misconduct cases, and protections for civilian whistleblowers. Change, she believed, had to be systemic, not just symbolic. Late one evening, she sat in her office, reflecting on how close she had come to being erased, but instead of retreating, she had chosen to fight, and to make sure that no one else would have to stand alone against a machine built to silence them. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something far bigger, and Belle Monroe was ready for everything that would come next. This story reminds us that silence is never neutral. Injustice, when left unchallenged, doesn't fade, it deepens, hiding in the systems we trust. Belle Monroe's journey teaches us that even in positions of authority, dignity can still be denied, and that courage is not about fearlessness, but persistence in the face of it. For older generations, many of whom have witnessed cycles of inequality and social change, this narrative reinforces a timeless truth. Real change often begins with those willing to speak when it's dangerous, and listen when it's uncomfortable. The young man who filmed the truth, the woman who demanded accountability, the boy who documented pain, each showed that no act of integrity is ever too small. As elders in our communities, we have a role to play, not only in sharing wisdom but in encouraging the next generation to stand tall, ask hard questions, and refuse to look away. Justice isn't a moment, it's a legacy, and that legacy grows stronger when truth is preserved, voices are protected, and no one is left to fight alone. In the end, it's not just about who has power, but about who uses it to protect those who don't.